Okay, today we're going to make sourdough bread. It's a cheater's bread. It's not the real sourdough. We're going to take a few steps to, you'll see. Here you can see my sourdough starter. It's very active. We got bubbles growing in there and stuff growing on the side. I've been feeding this for probably a good week, and it is really quite nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a cup of this sourdough starter, and as I almost emptied this out, you can see there's still some culture growing on the inside there. So that will feed that, and it will start a new culture for our next loaf. Now we're going to take this sourdough, and we're going to go ahead and put this sourdough starter in the bread machine. You can either do this with a bowl too and mix it yourself, but this is how I'm going to do it. I start in the bread machine just to mix it, and then I transfer it to a pan for the second rising. I'll show you in the video. So now that we got basically most of that out of there, we're going to use the same measuring cup for our water and our yeast. So what we do is we use 1/3 cup of water, and then we will add a little bit of sugar to that to help the starter to activate. I use this active dry yeast. I keep it in the fridge once I open it, but after I take out 2 tablespoons of it, I take it out and let it go at room temperature for about a half an hour or whatever, so that it's not just going from a cold sleep to try to get it activated. We will still use a little more sugar in our flour base, so I'll go ahead and put that in now. You can use whatever. I use about, you can see there, 2 or 3 tablespoons. From there, we're going to go ahead and get our white flour, which will be 1 cup. And we will get our whole wheat flour, which will be 1 cup. Now, you can add some, you could stop there and add a little more white flour, but what I like to do is use a little bit of, you can see, I'll just use a measuring cup here to see, but I have here, you could either use wheat germ or hemp seed, but I'm going to use a little pumpkin seed grinded up there. And I'm going to use a little flax seed. So this will be like a sprouted seed bread. And you just use, not too much, but enough to give it some nice chewiness. And then we're going to add just a little bit of salt. So let's say salt to taste, but you could say a teaspoon or to a tablespoon, whatever your salt tastes are. Alright, now that we have that flour mixture, it's very important to mix this in good and not to mix it in there, because salt will destroy your yeast. So you want your salt to be diluted in the flour mixture. Okay, so now that our flour is all mixed up, we're going to go ahead and dump it on top of our sourdough. At this point, you can go ahead and think about your yeast. So I'm going to go ahead now and drop the yeast again, which has been in room temperature, into my water. Now you could put this water in the microwave to bring it up to make sure it's warm. So maybe I'll go ahead and do that. I'll just pop this water in here for about 10 seconds just to warm it up. While that's getting warmed up, we'll go ahead and take a little bit of olive oil. And this is to taste too. Some people say 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons. So I just use that to make, if you use more, the bread is going to be more soft and oily, of course. And if you use less, it's going to be a little more dry. I like it nice and oily, like the Italian breads. So now you want to, with clean hands, you want to test this and feel and make sure it's not too hot. It should be able to be touched, you put your finger in there without, you want warm water, not too hot. So this is water with a little bit of our sourdough left over and sugar, and we'll go ahead and add our yeast. And it takes some, you could, some people just throw this in as soon as they get it mixed up, or some people wait for it to activate and make sure it's alive and kicking. We will give it a few seconds here while we explain a few other shortcuts we want to do. While we're waiting for that, I'll tell you a couple tricks on my this is, so basically we're using our sourdough as our yeast, because there is some culture in the sourdough, but it would take 24 hours for this to rise. So this we're adding the sourdough, and we're adding our basic yeast. So it's kind of a cheater sourdough. Now also I like to add just a little bit of apple cider vinegar to give the taste of the sourdough. So just a few sprinkles of that. And then another ingredient that we could possibly use at some point is a little bit of milk. And I'll show you when that comes into play. Alright, so it looks like our yeast is doing well here. It's starting to get that nice milky color, and it's starting to do a little bit of bubbling, so we know that it's active and working. So we'll go ahead and dump this 1/3 cup of water with our yeast into the bread. I want to get all that goodness off there. So sometimes I come back with a spatula so that everything, you don't waste any of that nice yeast. And then we'll go ahead and clear out our measuring cup too. You can see there's some yeast particles in there. Okay, now we go ahead, and this is an important part. We're going to start this, and what you want, this is when the milk comes into play. It's more important that this is a little wet. I can look right here and see that it's not quite wet enough. It's important that this will be wetter than drier, because you can always add a little flour to get it to the right consistency. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a few drops of milk in there, which also gives it a nice body and a lot of flavor to it. So we'll go ahead and drop just a little bit. But you can see now that the consistency of the bread is a little bit better. And if it's too wet, like it starts to stick to the side of the mixer, then we can always add flour to it to stiffen it up. But if you get it too dry, it's a little bit tough to get it to the right consistency. So you always want to err on the wet side as opposed to the dry side. And this is looking pretty good right here. You can see that we've got a nice bread consistency, and there's still a little bit of dry flours on the side there. And so once this bread goes through its whole process, 120 minutes, what will happen is that it will kind of keep it warm in the bread machine. It will mix it real well, it will knead it real well, and it will let it rise. And then after that, I will take it out and I will kind of beat it down a little bit, put it in a bread pan, and let it rise once more. And then I will bake it in the bread pan. I don't like to break it in these bread machines, as it bakes it with that spoon in there. They never seem to come out good. You can see here that we're looking pretty good in our consistency. It's starting to go together real nice, and it's not too dry. You want that thing to become one big lump, not a lot of little clumps. You want the gluten to kind of glue it all together. And if you'll know when it's too wet, because it will stick to the sides of the bread machine. So there you can see that it's really looking nice. The consistency is real good. We still have a little bit of dry, but for the most part, it's a real nice consistency. And again, if it's too wet, you can always add a little flour on the top. Just take your flour like this and just sprinkle a little on the top, and bring it to the point where you have it where it's a nice ball, but it's not sticking to the sides. And this looks almost perfect. So we hit it pretty good. That little bit of sprinkle of milk helped it to kind of come to the right consistency. Because the recipe actually is 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of whole wheat flour, 1 cup of white flour. So adding the pumpkin seeds and the hemp seed made it a little more dry ingredient, so that the milk helped it to kind of come to the right proportions. But this is looking real good. You can see it's starting to look like a real nice loaf of bread there. So again, after this, after this 1 hour of kind of kneading and rising, I will take it out and put it in my glass bread pan, and it will come to about 1 inch below the top. And then the second rise brings it almost even with the top, and then as you bake it, it rises a little more, and it will be a perfect loaf. Okay, we will stop there and have the next part when before we bake it, to show you what it looked like. Okay, as we mentioned earlier, once the bread machine stopped, we took the bread out and we just basically formed it into our glass pan. And it's about 1 inch down from the top, and we'll just wait for it to rise. So it rose in there for about 1 hour, and probably it's going to rise another 1 to 2 hours, depending how active the yeast is. I feel the slower the better, so the sourdough can kind of do its thing and make the whole loaf taste more sour. But we'll let you know how long it took to get this thing to rise before we could cook it. So the bread rose for about 4 hours actually. Took a little time, but that's better. The longer you let it rise, the more the sourdough culture is going to infuse into the bread. As you can see, it's very, very, it's soft, but it's not real airy, and so tasty. The air bubbles are perfect, I think. The crust is good, and it's very delicious.